and welcome to She Thinks, a podcast where you're allowed to think for yourself. I'm your host, Beverly Hallberg, and on today's episode, it is the April policy focus entitled Au Pairs for Senior Care. We're going to delve into the very real need that the current senior population and the future generations have in finding cost-effective in-home care as they age. In our discussion, we're going to look at the current au pair program, which is currently limited to childcare, and explain how the State Department can expand it so that seniors can stay in their homes and receive support services, all while reducing the high cost associated. And joining us to talk all about this is Senior Fellow at IWF and also the author of this study, Kristin Shapiro. Kristin has clerked for the Chief Judge of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit, litigated numerous cases in the United States Supreme Court, and currently practices appellate and constitutional law in Washington, D.C. Kristin, a pleasure to have you on She Thinks.
Thank you so much for inviting me to talk about the policy focus.
Now, this is not necessarily a fun topic, thinking about aging and how we receive care in the later years of our lives. So first of all, do people even really plan for this, or do most people really expect that magically we'll figure out what to do when we age? Is this something that people are thinking about?
I think it varies from family to family. There are certainly a number of families that do plan, have a plan in place for what will happen when they get older. I know my parents, for example, have long-term care insurance, but even those plans can go awry. Their long-term care insurer actually just had issues with bankruptcy and is having to reformulate the plan and the benefit levels that they receive. So even if you are among the number of Americans who plan, it's certainly, even that is not a guarantee that you'll be able to get the support that you need when you age.
And when you think about people who are approaching these later years, and of course we should still think about it when we're younger, do most people expect to stay at home and be cared for either by family or some type of in-home care worker who would come and take care of them?
Well, it's sort of a double-edged sword. So most people actually expect that they will end up in some sort of senior living facility. However, that is against their wishes. The vast majority of people, seniors, when they're asked about their preferences, 88%, they want to live at home. So even though most people expect to go to a senior living facility, a retirement home, a nursing home, something along those lines, that's not what we want to do. So there is a divergence right now between our expectations and our desires.
And I also think it's important to point out too that this can be a gradual process. So just because somebody needs some type of assistance, it doesn't mean that they're ready to go to a nursing home or some assisted living care. Maybe they just need somebody to help them with the chores, for example, or a few things healthcare wise. So a lot of this is a process, and we don't really have systems that fill in the gaps.
Right. I saw this with my own father-in-law who passed away last summer, is that he went from needing sort of lower levels of care in earlier years to needing much higher levels of care as he sort of approached the end of his life. And those initial early levels of care, they were really, he lost his ability to drive. He needed someone to drive him around. And, and if he didn't have someone to drive, then he was confined to his apartment, for most of the day. He, needed help with meal preparation. And then eventually he needed help with bathing and dressing himself. And so it is a continuum of care. It's not always, that you need sort of nursing home level care the entire time that you need support.
Now, of course, with all of this, it's about how much does it cost? And so when we look at people being able to live their lives in their home to the end of their life, it's really only the wealthy that can afford this type of care currently, correct?
It's about $60,000 a year on a full-time basis. If you need care, the one problem that many seniors face is that if you, unless you have family to help you out for free, which poses other issues, then you're really looking at hiring this care. And the market there is pretty much home healthcare aides, which are very expensive. And as I mentioned, about $60,000 a year on average if you need full-time care. And, most Americans cannot afford $60,000 a year. Now, one sad thing is that the cost of moving to a nursing home or senior living facility is also about $60,000 a year. And so in some ways it's a wash, but the issue is that if you sell your home, then you use that money, then you can pay for the nursing home. And so that is what ultimately many middle income seniors do, is they essentially sell down all their assets, their home, their life savings, and then that's what they use to sort of live the remainder of their life in a nursing home against their wishes.
And of course, we have the boomers who are entering into this stage of life. So we have a lot of people entering into it. Are there enough facilities, in-home healthcare workers to assist us? Where is the supply and demand on this?
Yes, well, specifically with respect to home healthcare workers, there's a shortage. And so it can be very difficult to obtain sort of, not just, pay for it, but to obtain reliable care that you need if you are looking to going to the private market and hiring this support.
And it seems like we're going to be entering into some more trouble just as people are living longer. Social Security is not solvent, so you're not going to have that buffer the same way. And families aren't as large. You have more and more people who have a few children. You even have a younger generation that say they don't want to have kids altogether. This seems like it's going to become more and more government responsibility if we don't step in now to help people with individual choice on how to meet this need. So the problem is getting greater, correct?
It's certainly getting worse. The number of elderly Americans is growing at its fastest rate since I think the 1800s, according to the most recent census data. You absolutely penned the problem. It's the fact that the baby boom generation and above, we're not having as many children as we used to. So you don't have the same number of family members who might be able to care for the older generation, as well as you also have less workers in the workforce to be able to support the generation, even if you want to hire that help and rely on the private market.
Well, this policy focuses on one solution to this. What do we do about it? And your solution is by expanding the au pair program, which is currently, the program is under the State Department. Now, of course, when we think of au pairs, we think of childcare. So how would this apply? How is the State Department involved? What are you actually suggesting in this policy focus?
Absolutely. Well, just a brief note on what the au pair program is for listeners who may not know. Since about the 1980s, the State Department has run a program where young foreign nationals come to the U.S. on a J visa, and they stay for 1 to 2 years, and they live with an American family, their host family, and they provide about 45 hours a week of childcare in return for free room and board and a weekly stipend. And, it's really a cultural and educational exchange program because I host an au pair, and you treat the au pair like a member of the family. And it's really a great way for young foreign nationals to come and get to be experienced in the U.S. And I know a lot of them also want to improve their English. And so while au pairs, are often kind of associated, and this was the stereotype I had in my mind, with high income families when I was growing up, it's actually one of the more affordable childcare solutions, particularly if you live in a high cost of living area or you have multiple children. I have 4 children, because the cost of an au pair is about $1,800 a month, or $20,000 or so a year, which compared to either a nanny or daycare for multiple children is often at least on par, but many times, in many cases, substantially lower than what you would pay for those other childcare options. And the State Department, runs this program. And so my policy focus is really talking about how we can adapt this program to expand it for the needs of the senior population.
And it seems like it would be a pretty easy switch, meaning if this is already working for a certain group of people, why couldn't we apply it to others? What are some of the hurdles in this?
I actually think I agree. I think it would be a pretty easy switch. So you have an existing regulatory and bureaucratic framework in place to running this au pair program. And by the way, it doesn't cost taxpayers anything because host families pay for the cost of hosting an au pair. And so really it was just the State Department. We need to take a look at their regulations for the current au pair program and see in what ways they might need to be adapted for a senior care program. So for example, we talk, my policy focus gets into some of the nitty gritty details, like, the eligibility requirements to participate as an au pair. I think you have to be between the ages of 18 and 26, and you need to speak English. And, the State Department might want to consider whether that age range or language ability might need to be modified for the senior population. For example, maybe au pairs don't need to speak English if you're dealing with a senior citizen who lives in a Spanish-speaking community and they don't need a Spanish, and they're okay with a Spanish-speaking provider. as just one example, but there's really no insurmountable hurdle. It's really just fine tuning the details to adapt it to the senior population.
And so I think a lot of people who are listening to this may think this is a great idea. Where are things on this? Is this going to happen? So have you made this pitch to the U.S. State Department, and is there any movement on it?
So I personally have not approached anyone at the State Department. The policy focus was just published, but we have received since that was published. Last week maybe. There's been some interest on Capitol Hill, and there are some meetings going on that I'll be involved in. I haven't heard anything from anyone at the State Department, but I wouldn't necessarily expect to. And so we'll see where it goes. It's a pretty new idea. There was a blog post. The only other place I've ever seen it published is there was a blog post by a woman, an adjunct fellow on the Council for Foreign Relations last fall that had a similar idea. And so hopefully, with the IWF's attention on this, it gets people, look into the idea more, and it becomes investigated.
And do you have any interest in maybe expanding this to other groups? Meaning, what about somebody who lives with a disability that needs help? Is this something that would just be solely for childcare and then the senior population? Or do you think it could actually be more open-ended? Anybody who does need some type of in-home care, could they participate with what you're suggesting the regulations be changed to?
I have a neighbor that has a severely special needs adult daughter, and I know that it's a very difficult situation, and my heart goes out to those people. And so I do think this is something that could be adapted to anyone who really needs long-term care. Policymakers are going to, of course, have to assess the impact of expansions of the program, because I know there is some concern that you don't want it to turn it into just a guest worker program, and so you wouldn't want the program to be too broad. But certainly, if you're talking about expanding the program to an in-home caregiving concept, it makes sense to me to give American families as much flexibility as possible.
And maybe you could speak to this question because you are using the au pair program yourself, somebody living in your home, taking care of your children. What is the screening like? What about a family who's listening to this say, it sounds great, but how can I be sure that the person coming into my home is going to be caring for my loved one well?
Yes. Well, so I trust, currently I have 1.5-year-old twins that I absolutely trust to our au pair. Everyone in the program receives a background check. Then there are sponsor organizations that run the program on behalf of the Department of State, and they screen both the host families and the au pairs for suitability in the program, including in-person interviews and orientation, as well as monitoring compliance with all the rules and regulations of the program throughout the au pair's stay in the United States. And the fact that, our au pairs care for children, or in what would this case, seniors in their home, for me, that makes me even more comfortable than, say, dropping my child off at a daycare center. I work from home most days, and I can, I am in and out constantly getting to be able to see my children throughout the day.
Right. Well, I think it's a great solution. People should look up this policy focus on IWF.org. It is called Au Pairs for Senior Care. Kristin Shapiro, author of this report and also senior fellow at IWF. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you all for joining us. Before you go, IWF does want you to know that we rely on the generosity of supporters like you. An investment in IWF fuels our efforts to enhance freedom, opportunity, and well-being for all Americans. So please consider making a small donation to IWF by visiting IWF.org/donate. That's IWF.org/donate. Last, if you enjoyed this episode of She Thinks, do leave us a rating or review. It does help. And we love it if you shared this episode so your friends can know where they can find more She Thinks. From all of us here at IWF, thanks for watching.